ADX Florence, the billion-dollar cage, inside America's costliest prison. Before we begin, hit subscribe, because what you're about to see is the costliest cage in human history. A place where silence is engineered, sunlight is rationed, and freedom costs over $1 billion. This isn't fiction. This is the real story of how America built the most expensive prison ever made, and what really happens inside ADX Florence. The fortress that money built. In the heart of Colorado, surrounded by barren desert and snow-capped mountains, lies a fortress that even time seems to fear, the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, better known as ADX Florence. It was never meant to be an ordinary prison. It was designed to be the prison, the end of the line for the most dangerous men alive. Terrorists, drug lords, mob bosses, and killers who even other inmates feared. But what most people don't know is that this fortress didn't just swallow lives. It devoured money. Since its opening in 1994, ADX Florence has quietly drained hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, making it the most expensive correctional facility per inmate in U.S. history. The price of absolute control, constructed after a wave of prison violence in the 1980s, including deadly riots at Marion and Atlanta, the government decided they needed something different, something unbreakable. So, under the Federal Bureau of Prisons, construction began in 1991 on a 37-acre site just outside the small town of Florence, Colorado. The cost, roughly $60 million at the time, which, adjusted for inflation, nears $140 million today. But that's just the start. What makes ADX truly a billion-dollar cage isn't just the concrete and steel, it's the ongoing cost of keeping it operational. Each inmate costs 3 to 5 times more to house than in a standard federal facility. Estimates sue, just the annual budget for ADX operations surpasses $30 million for just over 400 prisoners. That's $75,000 per inmate per year, compared to an average of $22,000 in regular federal prisons. Life inside the costliest box. Each cell is an 87-square-foot concrete vault, a concrete bed, a concrete desk, a steel toilet sink combo, and a narrow slit for a window, angled so prisoners can't even see the sky. The isolation is total. Inmates spend 23 hours a day alone. Meals slide through a metal slot. Their only human contact, guards wearing gloves. Even recreation is solitary. A 1-hour walk inside a concrete pen the size of a dog kennel under heavy surveillance. Everything, from airflow to sound, was engineered for control. The air ducts are curved to prevent conversation between cells. The lights never fully go out, and every movement, from showering to exercising, is monitored by motion sensors and 1,400 cameras. All that surveillance tech, security staffing, and maintenance costs millions annually. And yet, despite this mountain of money, ADX has been repeatedly accused of failing in the one thing it promised: human rights compliance. The hidden human cost. The price of silence at ADX isn't just financial, it's psychological. In 2012, human rights lawyers filed a class action lawsuit, Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, accusing ADX of neglecting mentally ill inmates, some of whom mutilated themselves or screamed for hours in isolation. Court records revealed haunting scenes, men slashing their wrists, smearing blood on cell walls, or swallowing razor blades just to feel something real. The settlement in 2015 forced the Bureau to create a new mental health program, costing even more taxpayer money. By the time improvements were implemented, the facility's annual budget had already surged past $35 million. ADX wasn't just a cage for the violent, and it became a psychiatric ward made of concrete and silence. And the cost of maintaining that silence keeps climbing. A prison that outlasts its purpose. When the Supermax was first built, officials called it escape-proof. But over the years, critics, including former wardens and Congress members, have questioned whether ADX still serves its intended purpose. Many inmates are now older, weaker, or have spent decades in solitary confinement. Former Warden Robert Hood once said in a 2007 interview, It's not designed for rehabilitation. It's designed for total control, and total control costs money. The Bureau of Prisons refuses to disclose exact budget figures, citing security reasons. But federal audits suggest that by 2020, total cumulative spending related to ADX construction, maintenance, and special housing programs exceeded $1.2 billion. The paradox of power. The paradox is simple. The more control the government seeks, the more expensive the system becomes. From the bulletproof glass to the automated steel doors, from biometric locks to redundant security grids, ADX is an engineering marvel of paranoia. Each piece of technology is meant to prevent communication, escape, or defiance. But even with billions poured into silence, inmates still find ways to send messages through plumbing systems, tapping codes, and even smuggled letters. In 2015, an internal audit found that ADX had spent $2.4 million upgrading its surveillance systems to prevent unauthorized inmate communication. That's the price of fear, a cycle of control feeding on itself. Voices from the inside, former ADX inmates, including Thomas Silverstein, Ramzi Youssef, and Ted Kaczynski, have described the experience as a living tomb. Kaczynski, the Unabomber, once wrote in a letter smuggled to a journalist, "They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. I call it the cemetery of the living." Every word from inside costs taxpayers, in legal monitoring, mail inspection, and staff overtime. Each Ellis, a suit, each protest, each mental health intervention adds more to the tab. Narrator, closing Chapter 1. In a country that spends billions on freedom, the United States also spends billions on confinement. And nowhere is that contradiction more visible than inside ADX Florence, the billion-dollar cage that guards not just criminals, but America's conscience. The men who cost millions. Inside the cells of America's most dangerous, they say every brick in ADX Florence was laid with fear. But what really fills those concrete walls, what truly drives the staggering cost of this Supermax, are the men it was built to contain. Each cell tells a story, and each story has a price tag. The human budget line. The federal government calls them high-risk inmates. To the public, they are names carved in infamy: terrorists, gang leaders, and serial killers. To ADX, they're million-dollar security liabilities. Each high-profile inmate adds another layer of cost, from extra guards to specialized surveillance to courtroom expenses. Housing the worst of the worst is not just a matter of safety, it's an economy of control. The terrorists' wing, where silence is policy. The most secure section of ADX Florence is known as Range 13. It's here the government spends millions each year to isolate a few of the world's most notorious terrorists. Among them once stood Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing; Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker of 9/11; Richard Reed, the shoe bomber; Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, the underwear bomber. Each of these men is housed in total isolation, monitored by soundproof intercoms, motion sensors, and biometric door locks. The cost of guarding one high-threat inmate? Nearly $200,000 per year, according to internal Bureau of Prisons data. Their units require around-the-clock staffing, specialized mail inspection, and security clearances for every staff member who enters. Every meal, every escort, every document scanned adds another dollar to the running bill of control. The U.S. government doesn't just imprison them, it quarantines them. The Unabomber's solitary legacy. In another wing of ADX for decades lived one of the most infamous minds in modern history, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Convicted in 1998, Kaczynski's confinement was a study in controlled isolation. He was kept in a cell smaller than a parking space, surrounded by reinforced walls designed to muffle even the sound of breathing. Everything he wrote, every letter, every thought, was monitored. According to the Federal Times, the government spent over $1.5 million during Kaczynski's first decade in ADX, covering staff overtime, mail inspection, and psychiatric evaluations. He once described his existence as a form of living death. And for taxpayers, it was a costly one. The gang generals, control by cost. Beyond the terrorists and lone wolves are the men who control entire prison empires from behind bars, gang leaders. Inmates like Thomas Silverstein, Barry Mills, and Tyler Bingham, all members of the Aryan Brotherhood, turned federal facilities into war zones during the 1980s. To prevent more bloodshed, they were buried alive inside ADX. But controlling gang leaders isn't cheap. Silverstein was kept in continuous solitary confinement for over 36 years, a record in U.S. history. His cell, equipped with reinforced barriers and monitored 24/7, required 3 guards for every movement, costing over $90,000 per year in staff time alone. He once wrote, "They call this place secure, but it's more like a laboratory. We are experiments in isolation." The Bureau's response to such men wasn't rehabilitation. It was containment through endless spending. The more influence they had, the higher the price of their silence. The cartel connection. The sea of global narcotics empires brought a new breed of inmate, one with deep pockets and deep influence. Men like El Chapo Guzman, leader of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, transformed ADX Florence from a domestic fortress into a geopolitical stronghold. When El Chapo arrived in 2019, U.S. Marshals deployed one of the most expensive inmate transfers in history, involving air escorts, armored convoys, and elite tactical teams. Estimated cost, $2.3 million for a single transfer. Inside ADX, El Chapo's confinement is nearly surgical. His communications are restricted, his recreation monitored, and even his family correspondence scanned line by FBI analysts. A former Bureau official admitted anonymously to the Denver Post, "El Chapo alone adds over $1 million a year to ADX's operational cost. You don't guard him. You guard the myth of him escaping. The cost of fear. Fear is expensive." Every threat, every rumor of an escape attempt or riot triggers emergency lockdown procedures. Each lockdown, complete with overtime pay, surveillance reviews, and system diagnostics, can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single week. Between 2000 and 2020, ADX underwent at least 30 full lockdowns, many triggered by intelligence of possible coordinated actions from inside. In one 2009 report obtained by the Marshall Project, an internal memo estimated that the facility's counter-communication operations, efforts to intercept secret inmate messages, cost over $5 million in a single year. The irony? Even in the most expensive prison on Earth, inmates still find ways to communicate. Hidden codes in letters, Morse-like tapping through pipes, even folded paper kites slid beneath cell doors. Money, it seems, can buy silence, but never completely. The secret staff behind the walls, behind ADX's walls, is an invisible army. Psychologists, security techs, analysts, tactical units, maintenance crews, and dog handlers, all part of what insiders call the silent workforce. Over 400 staff members maintain the daily operation of the facility, meaning there's nearly one staffer for every inmate. The annual payroll alone exceeds $20 million. Each guard undergoes intensive psychological screening and anti-corruption training. They are rotated between posts every few months to prevent familiarity with inmates, another costly but necessary precaution. A former officer told PBS Frontline, "You don't work at ADX for long. The stress eats at you. But the government pays well to keep you quiet." The economics of control. The economic model of ADX Florence isn't about rehabilitation or education. It's about containment at any cost. There are no workshops, no prison industries, no libraries open to the general population. Every program must be delivered in isolation, through video link or controlled tablet. This costs more than traditional corrections. The digital education systems alone, introduced after the 2015 Cunningham settlement, have cost over $12 million to implement and maintain. Security, isolation, and psychological stability. Each layer adds another zero to the bill. The business of isolation. How ADX became an industry. When a prison becomes an economy, the walls stop being just walls. They become assets. ADX. Florence was built to contain men. But over the years, it began to feed an entire network of industries, contracts, and careers. And with billions in federal dollars pouring through its gates, America's most secure prison quietly transformed into America's most lucrative cage. The money machine behind the bars. ADX. Florence isn't just a prison. It's a system sustained by endless procurement. Food vendors, medical suppliers, tech companies, private contractors, all linked by the same thing, federal funding. According to the Federal Procurement Data System, the Bureau of Prisons has awarded over $800 million contracts related to the ADX Florence complex since 1994. Everything, from the reinforced concrete mix to the sensor systems, comes from private bids. Companies like Johnson Controls, GE Security, Motorola, and Honeywell have all received federal contracts connected to Supermax operations. Each upgrade, repair, or security enhancement adds millions to the total cost. One Department of Justice audit revealed that between 2010 and 2020, the Florence complex spent an average of $40 million annually, 70% of it through private vendors. So, while inmates inside live in near silence, the money outside never stops moving. Yeah. The rise of the Supermax economy. The 1990s saw an explosion in Supermax prisons, facilities modeled after ADX. At one point, nearly 44 states had built their own versions of extreme isolation prisons, many inspired by Florence's blueprint. Consultants who worked on ADX's design began selling their expertise nationwide. Architectural firms specialized in anti-communication layouts. Tech companies marketed acoustic isolation systems. Even furniture manufacturers built suicide-resistant beds and desks, a niche worth millions. What started as a single fortress became a template for profit. By 2015, the U.S. was spending over $5 billion annually maintaining Supermax and segregation units across the country. A former federal architect told the New York Times, ADX was never just about security, it was about innovation, and innovation always finds a buyer. The cost of technology, surveillance without sleep. Every year, ADX updates its security grid. From the outside, it looks like progress. Inside, it's a technological arms race. In 2008, the Bureau spent over $3.2 million upgrading camera systems, replacing analog units with digital 360-degree surveillance. By 2018, new AI-powered motion sensors were installed in hallways to detect micro movements. Even the air systems are monitored. A multi-million-dollar air signature project ensures that no gases, chemical agents, or communicative taps through vents go undetected. These systems are expensive not just to install, but to maintain. The annual maintenance budget for digital surveillance infrastructure now exceeds $5 million per year. And still, human oversight remains critical. Every shift requires 2 officers in the control room, operating hundreds of screens, costing another $1.8 million annually in wages and overtime. The contractor's goldmine. Every few years, federal contracts are renewed, and the bidding begins again. In 2014, the Bureau of Prisons awarded a $12 million contract for structural integrity reinforcement, primarily sealing concrete cracks caused by decades of temperature shifts. In 2017, another $8.6 million was spent upgrading perimeter fencing and seismic detectors to prevent tunneling. But it's not just construction. Even daily operations rely on private contractors. Food services by Aramark and Trinity Services Group, sanitation and waste control by Stericycle, medical equipment supplied through McKesson Corporation, each one bills the government directly, often at premium rates due to security clearance costs. A 2019 Government Accountability Office report estimated that private contracting accounts for over 65% of ADX's yearly operational expenses. The prison that was built to isolate now thrives on dependence. Staff overtime and the psychology of burnout. The Supermax environment doesn't just break inmates, it breaks employees. Guards and staff at ADX have one of the highest burnout rates in federal service. Many last less than 5 years before transferring out or quitting entirely. The Bureau compensates with overtime pay and mental health counseling programs. The result? A ballooning personnel budget. By 2022, ADX Florence's staff payroll exceeded $22 million annually, including nearly $4 million in overtime alone. The Department of Justice even funds resilience programs. There's here too. AP sessions for correctional officers exposed to prolonged stress and isolation. Former officer David Ward told 60 Minutes. You start to feel the silence crawling inside you. The inmates aren't the only ones locked up here. Lawsuits, settlements, and the price of pain. Each lawsuit against ADX adds another layer of cost. In 2012, the Cunningham vs. BOP class action lawsuit cost the government over $8 million in legal fees and settlements. In 2015, multiple individual cases brought by inmates with mental illness added $4.3 million more in compensation and medical program funding. In 2019, a lawsuit alleging excessive force by guards led to a confidential settlement, reportedly over $1 million. Even outside the courtroom, compliance costs are staggering. New mental health monitoring units, body cameras, and suicide-resistant installations have cost taxpayers over $10 million since 2015. Every complaint filed, every settlement reached, becomes another receipt in the ledger of America's most secure prison. Political theater and funding power, ADX. Florence has also become a political tool. Every election cycle, officials tout the prison as proof of America's strength against terror. That rhetoric translates to continued funding. When Congress reviews the Bureau of Prisons' annual budget, ADX is often singled out as a national security asset, not just a correctional facility. That designation ensures it receives priority funding, even when other prisons face cuts. Over the last decade, ADX's budget has grown nearly 25%, while most other federal prisons have seen reductions. For lawmakers, keeping it funded is symbolic, proof that America's enemies are truly buried deep. But behind the symbolism lies a question no one wants to ask. If a cage costs billions, who really benefits? The forgotten town that depends on a prison, beyond the walls, the tiny town of Florence, Colorado, population barely 4,000, survives on ADX's existence. The local economy depends on federal employment. Shops, schools, and even housing markets revolve around the prison staff. One local business owner told Colorado Public Radio, "If ADX closed tomorrow, this town would disappear. We built our lives on a prison." It's a haunting irony, a community's survival tied to a facility that thrives on isolation. Florence's restaurants feed off-duty guards. Its schools educate their children. Its silence, too, is paid for by the billion-dollar cage. ADX. Florence was supposed to be an answer to violence. But what it became is an economy, one that thrives on fear, silence, and control. Every gate, every lock, every dollar, part of a system too profitable to dismantle. And the deeper you follow the money, the clearer one truth becomes. In America, isolation is not just punishment. It's business. The dark psychology of confinement, breaking minds, not bodies. You can build walls to contain bodies, but you can't build one that doesn't echo. At ADX Florence, silence is the most expensive weapon ever engineered, a weapon aimed not at the body, but at the mind. And after decades of isolation, even the strongest minds begin to fracture. This is where the billion-dollar cage turns from concrete and steel into something far darker, a psychological experiment in endurance, the blueprint of isolation. The architects of ADX didn't just build a prison, they built a behavioral control system. Every inch of the facility was designed around a single psychological goal, to eliminate control from the inmate's life. From the moment a prisoner wakes up to the moment lights dim, every action, meals, movement, hygiene, is dictated by automation and schedule. The design principle is called total environmental management. Cells are positioned to prevent line-of-sight contact. Sound-absorbing materials muffle voices. Even airflow is calibrated so that inmates can't talk through vent, as this was meant to reduce violence. But psychologists have found that it also strips away identity. Dr. Craig Haney, one of the leading researchers on solitary confinement, once said, ADX isn't just confining the body, it's erasing the person. The clinical evidence of a crumbling mind. Since its opening, mental deterioration among ADX inmates has been documented repeatedly. A 2013 Yale Law School report described the facility as a mental health crisis disguised as security. Symptoms include hallucinations, self-harm and mutilation, severe paranoia, emotional blunting, suicidal ideation. One former inmate described it as being buried in your own head. Internal Bureau of Prisons data, leaked in 2017, revealed that nearly 40% of ADX inmates had diagnosable mental disorders. Yet for decades, treatment was minimal, often limited to short check-ins through steel doors. In 2005, a prisoner named Jack Powers, convicted of bank robbery, mutilated himself multiple times during his 12 years at ADX. He later testified that he cut open his arm to prove to himself he was still alive. His lawsuit helped expose how psychological neglect had become institutionalized. The lawsuit that shook the walls. By 2012, ADX had reached a breaking point. The class action case Cunningham v. Federal Bureau of Prisons was filed on behalf of several mentally ill inmates. Their allegations were chilling. Prisoners screaming through the night, smearing blood on walls, hearing voices through the vents, and receiving little to no psychiatric care. The lawsuit revealed that some inmates were punished for their illness, written up for disruptive behavior caused by psychosis. When federal investigators reviewed ADX's records, they found repeated suicide attempts that were ignored or misclassified. In 2013, an internal memo acknowledged that ADX lacked appropriate mental health staffing for extreme isolation conditions. The resulting 2015 settlement forced sweeping reforms, including the creation of the Control Unit Step-Down Program, a gradual release pathway combining therapy with earned privileges. Cost of compliance: over $15 million in training, staff, and infrastructure. Cost in human lives before that? Immeasurable. The Step-Down Program: hope or experiment? The Step-Down Program was marketed as progress, an exit ramp from total isolation. Inmates could earn small privileges: a radio, a phone call, limited recreation with another inmate. But critics argue it's psychological manipulation. The system rewards obedience, not rehabilitation. Even a single infraction, an argument, a gesture, resets months of progress. In 2018, investigative journalist Mark Benelli gained rare access to ADX for Rolling Stone. He described the step-down program as a psychological maze where the goalposts keep moving. A staff psychologist interviewed anonymously said, "We're teaching them compliance, not coping. It's behavior modification, not healing." Still, the Bureau points to declining rates of self-harm and improved staff safety as proof of success. The irony? These programs only added to the facility's cost, expanding the mental health budget by nearly $5 million annually. The science of silence. Psychologists call it sensory deprivation. Inmates call it the hole inside the hole. At ADX, the environment itself is a form of conditioning. The constant hum of ventilation, the lack of natural light, the echo of footsteps bouncing off concrete, reminding every man how alone he is. A 2019 study by Dr. Sharon Shalev found that inmates in long-term solitary confinement experience the same neural patterns seen in trauma victims and war survivors. Their brains physically change, shrinking in areas that regulate emotion and memory. One ADX guard described an inmate who began looking to the walls. When questioned, the inmate replied, "The walls are the only ones who listen without writing me up." The guard's psychological toll. The mental cost doesn't stop at the inmates. ADX correctional officers work in a perpetual state of high alert. They witness self-harm, hear screams that echo through the halls, and carry out force extractions on men who've lost all sense of reality. The Bureau's internal health assessments reveal staggering rates of PTSD, insomnia, and anxiety among ADX staff. In 2021, the Department of Justice launched a wellness initiative for federal correctional workers after several suicides were reported among employees of high-security facilities, including Florence. Officer DL told the Marshall Project, "After a few years here, you stop sleeping. You hear their voices in your dreams. It changes you, slowly." The cost of therapy and turnover is now factored into ADX's operational budget, another invisible line item in the billion-dollar bill. When silence becomes a weapon, the longer inmates stay, the more their mental decay becomes visible. Some bang on their doors for hours. Others whisper to imaginary people. A few refuse to speak altogether, not from choice, but from psychological collapse. Prison staff call it flattening. It's when a man's personality erodes so completely that he no longer reacts to pain or conversation. Former inmate Larry Ray described it best in a 2014 deposition. "They built a place to keep people quiet, and it worked. Too well. The noise outside stopped, but the noise in our heads never did." What makes ADX so chilling isn't just its cost or its cruelty. It's that the system is self-sustaining. The more damage isolation causes, the more resources the Bureau must spend to contain it. A billion-dollar loop, feeding itself through suffering. The philosophical price: at what point does a prison stop being about justice and start becoming a laboratory? Scholars from Yale, Harvard, and the United Nations have called ADX a violation of human dignity. The UN Mandela Rules, adopted in 2015, classify long-term solitary confinement, more than 15 days, as torture. At ADX, some men have endured it for decades. In 2017, a UN Special Rapporteur publicly condemned the U.S., stating, "The conditions of confinement at ADX Florence amount to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment." And yet, the prison remains fully funded, fully operational, and politically untouchable. Because in America, the appearance of control is often worth more than compassion. ADX Florence was built to stop violence, but it created a new kind of war, one fought in the human mind. It's a war without screams, without blood, only the quiet disintegration of thought, one day at a time. And as the billion-dollar cage keeps running, the question grows louder. How much longer can a nation afford to pay for silence? In the end, ADX Florence stands as more than a prison. It's a monument to control, a billion-dollar promise that America would never again lose grip on its most dangerous men. But the walls that keep them in have trapped something else too: a nation's conscience. Behind every steel door lies not just a criminal, but a question: how far will we go to feel safe? How much will we spend to silence fear? Decades later, the Alcatraz of the Rockies still hums in the desert, swallowing men, money, and memories. And though it was built to contain violence, its legacy is not peace. It's the cost of control. If this story opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this documentary with someone who still believes justice is free. Because inside the billion-dollar cage, the real price is being paid every day.